Welcome to episode 5 of our 6-part Love and Responsibility series, co-hosted by the Theology of the Body Institute channel and Pints with Aquinas. If you haven't seen the previous 4 episodes, make sure to click the links in the description below. Watch those first before tuning in here to episode 5.
All right, we are back. This is the 5th part of our series on love and responsibility. Very excited to get into today's topic,
And
Sexology.
it's fun switching back and forth.
You like that?
I do. Like your studio, my studio.
Yeah.
It's fun to have you here in my studio.
It's
Our
great.
studio. Thank you, Juan.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You've done an excellent job.
Thank you. My son Thomas built this.
I heard.
Yeah.
Talented dude. And your new logo is 8 million times better
Oh,
than
I
your
know.
last one. Well done.
Thank you.
All right, let's do it, because here we get to talk about marital sex. We get to talk about orgasm. We get to all this
Listen
sort
to
of
this. Listen
juicy
to this.
stuff. So-
Let me just give you a little litany
All right.
of what John Paul II talks about in this chapter, which certainly raised eyebrows when he wrote this in 1960, right? So sexology, this chapter is called Sexology and Ethics. Sexology is the clinical study of human sexuality, right? John Paul uses the findings of clinical sexology to confirm the personalistic norm in marital relations. What's the personalistic norm? Please watch the other episodes if you haven't already. But personalistic norm means we have to uphold and honor the dignity of the person in all of our behavior, sexual or otherwise. The person is not a thing. Person is not something to use. The person is someone to love. What does that mean? We're going to look very practically. And I say here, one might be surprised to find such unabashed discussions by a saint about, here's the litany, erogenous zones, genital engorgement, the erectile nerve, premature ejaculation, vaginismus, the curve of sexual arousal, the need for men to help their wives experience orgasm, and the need for wives not to pretend they have experienced orgasm. Indeed, this section of the book raised enough eyebrows that efforts were made to have it omitted in at least one edition. So while some may think this is inappropriate for a saint and a bishop to be talking about, obviously the young John Paul II thought this was very important. And what he's saying is, as pastors, as ministers of the gospel, marital relations are critical for helping married people live out the call to holiness. And one of the things that spouses run into in their marital relations is a physiological reality that presents to married couples a, shall we say, difficult circumstances that the man can take advantage of in his fallenness that leads to a great disadvantage for the woman. And the physiological reality is this. It's physically possible for a man to have genital intercourse without the woman's full involvement, right? She could be unconscious and the man could still have sexual relations with her. This doesn't typically go the other way, right? There's this physiological difference that is meant in God's design to allow the man to be a gift to the woman in such a way that honors her dignity. But the physiological difference in our fallen humanity can lead the man to a certain, John Paul II uses the word brutality in sexual relations, where the woman feels used, when she doesn't participate fully in the act, when the man just has his sexual pleasure at her expense and she doesn't come to experience the full joy of the sexual act physically. This can create a real resentment, John Paul II points to. And this is all from his pastoral experience dealing with couples, counseling couples in the confessional and otherwise. And this calls for the man to have a particular responsibility to uphold the dignity of his wife. Now, all that said, we also have to affirm the woman, of course, has a particular responsibility to uphold the dignity of the man. Obviously, it goes both ways. But he's also recognizing, and I think legitimately so, this physiological difference that makes it easier for the man to take advantage of the woman in some ways. What are your thoughts on that as an idea?
Oh, yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense to me. I don't see any problem with that at all. I suppose I'm not connecting the dots between the male is the initiator and can engage without the involvement of the woman equals, maybe greater responsibility on the part of the man to what?
To make sure that the wife is fully engaged in the sexual act.
I see. Because if she's not fully engaged, she won't experience the full delight of
Correct.
it. So it's up to him to initiate and to bring her along that.
He plays a very important role. Put it this way. A man can achieve climax without the woman's involvement. But it doesn't so easily go the other way that the woman could achieve climax without the without the man's involvement.
Right. In the context of sexual between the two. Yeah.
That's exactly what we're talking about. In the marital act.
Yes.
Obviously, a woman could masturbate, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the marital act. The man has to play a particularly involved role in helping his wife
So he's
to achieve orgasm.
He's called not only to rise to the occasion, but to bring her with him to this place.
Correct.
There's a special emphasis or responsibility on the part of the man to do. That makes sense, yeah.
Correct. Yeah. Can we go, let's just jump right into quote number 1 here. And check out I just want to tell our viewers, get the PDF in the show notes, not the show notes, the description.
The personalistic norm, this bit?
Are you on, do you have the right chapter?
5? Yeah.
Chapter 5, look at number 1.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah.
Number 1.
If a husband is truly to love his wife, it is necessary to insist that intercourse must not serve merely as a means of allowing his climax. The man must take the difference between male and female reactions into account so that climax may be reached by both and as far as possible occur in both simultaneously. The husband must do this not for hedonistic but for altruistic reasons. In this case, if we take into account the shorter and more violent curve of arousal, that's great, or in the man, such tenderness on his part in the context of marital intercourse acquires the significance of an act of virtue. Beautiful.
Yeah. It really is a call. Husbands, we are called to virtue here. We are called truly to love our wives as Christ loved the church. And if in saying that, you're like, orgasm as Christ loves the church, how does that even go together? The whole of this book, he himself says at the start, is to help couples realize that sexual love is meant to express the love we're called to in the gospel. Right? St. Paul says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. And Christ says that he loved the bride. Why? So that his joy might be in her and her joy might be complete. And yes, indeed, the marital act is meant to be an expression of that fullness of the joy of Christ's love. And that joy is the joy of the Trinity, the ecstasy of the divine exchange of love found among the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
You must get exhausted having to button up every statement of yours with, I'm not saying God is sexual. But I mean, I don't think it's true that the mother pelican stabs herself in the chest to feed her children with the blood of, we see this on many tabernacles around the world. I don't think that's true. I think it's kind of a mythical idea. But no one's running around being like, we're not saying God is a pelican. I understand why you have to say that, because this is the common misunderstanding. But for those in the back, we're not saying that God is sexual.
Yes. I'll tell a story. I was at a secular university. The Newman Club had invited me to give a talk years ago at this secular university. So they put ads out around the campus. So I got all the different groups coming out to hear what I had to say. And I had spent a lot of time talking about the contraception issue, as we've talked about in previous episodes. And this one woman got up at the Q&A, and she was very uppity with me. And she said, if sex is only for procreation, why did God give a woman a clitoris? And I said,
never said it was.
I never said sex was only for procreation. I said it's integral to what God created in making us male and female. And we shouldn't try to erase or extricate or negate something integral to the experience. So I clarified that first of all. But then I said, I'll tell you why God gave woman a clitoris, so she could have a bodily participation in the eternal ecstasy of the Trinity. And she just went, oh. She was not expecting that answer. She thought she stumped me, right? But it's true. Why did God make sexual pleasure? God made it. God made the genitals so sensitive to pleasure. Why? It's meant to be integrally, this is the key, an integral experience of joy. And when I say integral, I mean the unity of body and soul. I mean the unity of that which is physical and that which is spiritual. I mean the unity of that which is sexual and that which is spiritual. Lust is not the only way to experience our sexuality. I'll read this from the little study page here. Yeah. Wojtyła shows himself a fearless promoter of the proper integral enjoyment of marital intercourse, seeing this as a critical ingredient of a healthy marriage. And it's to that end that he's addressing this very practical problem that's in lots of marriages where we kind of know the stereotypical image of the selfish man who has his pleasure and he rolls over and falls asleep.
Yeah.
Such a man cannot be said to love his wife as Christ loves the church, right? If we are to love as Christ loves the church, then we have to have a loving tenderness towards our wives where we want them to be fully involved in the marital act in as much as possible.
Yeah.
I think that's an important qualifier. In as much as possible for the husband and the wife to experience the joy of climax together. That's the invitation here. And we're all called to, without scrupulousness, I think this is important, because over the years, as I've taught this many, many times, I've had husbands come up to me, I've had wives come up to me and think, we're doing something so wrong because, sometimes my husband achieves climax and I don't, and I don't even necessarily want to in that instance, and it's going to take too long and it can be painful if he keeps trying to help me.
Right.
And so please avoid scruples as if this is some gospel fundamental truth that if you don't experience mutual climax in every act of intercourse, something's dreadfully wrong. We're not saying any of that. We're saying there's an invitation over the span of married life to make sure that the woman is not just an object for the man's orgasm, but that she's fully involved and participating in the joys of the marital act.
Yeah.
And the only way, actually, Matt, would you read that third bullet? I think this gets at something very important.
Because matrimony protects potential motherhood, it frees the woman in some fundamental measure from the anxiety that prevents her from genuinely surrendering herself in sexual intercourse.
So pause there for a moment. Matrimony, we talked about this in a previous episode, that it means the call to motherhood. And that places a particular responsibility on the man to honor the fact that having sexual intercourse with my wife could make her a mother. And what will enable the wife to open fully to the participation in the marital act, he talks about the fear of pregnancy, right? And how fear of pregnancy can really cramp the experience of sexual relations.
That's what we were saying earlier, didn't we?
Yeah. And the key for the woman to overcome that fear is the certainty, this man will never leave me. This man will father this child. This man is with me forever.
I was speaking to a nurse recently, and she said it's common knowledge that women are more likely to go into labor on the weekend when their husband is around.
Huh.
I didn't know that was common
I
knowledge.
didn't know that
I
either.
don't know if other people had the same idea, but to her it was obvious. So yes, like a woman is far more likely to go into labor. Why? Because that's what the man's there to do, to protect her and child.
And go ahead, conclude this. This is tragic what the modern world has bought into.
In the modern world, so-called liberated women have in fact forfeited their right to this genuine protection, a harmonious, loving marriage in favor of the protection of the pill,
The protection
quote
in
unquote.
quotes, right?
And if that fails, the right to abortion.
So clearly, women alone get pregnant, but they never get pregnant alone, right? There's always a man here. And we were talking in another episode about the cynical approach where we never think that genuine love is possible. Women have bought into this idea that men are never going to be faithful. They're never going to honor me in the way I want to be honored. And, there's a lot of evidence to indicate why women may think that way. And so they think the way to be liberated from this dilemma that men won't honor me, men won't protect me, men won't be with me in the vulnerability of being a pregnant woman and giving birth and raising a child, the man's not going to be there. Instead of demanding the man be there, instead of calling men forth because
The invitation to be masculine.
I want to be called forth to authentic masculinity. Genuine men want to be called forth. And we can sometimes stoop as low as the woman will allow us to stoop. And that's not to take us off the hook as if our virtue is dependent on the woman.
Right.
But if the woman lets us stoop, sometimes we will be willing to stoop. If the woman says, I know what I'm worth, and I'm calling you out to show me what I'm worth, good men will rise to the occasion. But what the modern, quote, liberated woman has bought into is men will never be there for me. They're not going to love me. They won't protect me. I'm vulnerable in the fact that I'm the one who gets pregnant. The way I solve this problem is not by calling men to virtue, but by protecting myself with contraception. And if that fails,
A right.
a right to abort my child. This is the world we live in right now, where we don't really believe in love and responsibility. We don't believe in it. The invitation is really an invitation to hope, to pay attention to what we really desire, and to recognize I am right to hope for genuine love.
I love this line about, the man should lead his wife to climax whenever possible, that it should occur in both simultaneously. I love this next line. The husband must not do this for hedonistic but altruistic reasons.
Yes.
We said in a previous episode that love is to will the good of the other for their sake.
Right.
But of course, it's possible in a way to will the good of the other for my sake.
Yes.
Namely, I will lead you to climax so I can feel like the man.
Right.
So it's not about you at all.
Yeah.
It's really about me and the pleasure I receive from your
pleasure.
So I'm the end goal, not you, not us.
Yeah, even as you say that, I'm doing a little examination of conscience. Yeah,
Well, what's so weird about sex? I mean, it's like this with everything. Like many things, it's not about the sex isn't about the sex. It's like the food isn't about the food.
Yeah.
There's so much tied up here. Like if you grew up and you were bullied and you felt like no woman would ever delight in you,
Yes.
then maybe one of the most attractive things that now occurs to you is when your wife delights in you in the sexual act.
Yes.
And so what ends up happening, and I've fallen into this, I think, in the past, is that I'm seeking her delight for my sake, not even just in a hedonistic way, but almost in a therapeutic way. Let your delight in me make up for the lack of delight I experienced once upon a time in a non-sexual way.
yes.
Like there's so much tangled up in this, but one of the beautiful things about going down this road of chastity is it's not just healing the sexual impulse, it's also healing you.
Yes, amen, brother.
Yeah, so
I'm
much.
so glad you said that. It does. I like that how you said it. This entanglement with all these other aspects of my person. There is no doubt in my mind that real difficulties I brought into my marriage, and it always manifests itself in the marriage bed. The marriage bed and the difficulties, struggles, tensions, disagreements, awkward.
All of that,
is like a window into deep stuff in our souls. And I grew up in a home environment where my older brother very much belittled me. And, you little shit and you piece of shit and you dork. It was just like the constant refrain. And this is just the world I know.
Yeah.
And at one point in my life, just to protect myself from the onslaught of that insult, I had to separate off from the part of me that was being insulted, and I had to agree with my brother. If I wanted to win my brother's approval, which I did, I had to agree with his insults of me. And there's this separation from myself. And I came into my marriage, unbeknownst to me, I was 26 when I got married. Unbeknownst to me, I was terribly insecure in my own identity. And all those identity issues, the rejection wound, let's just sum it up right there. It was a rejection wound. I bring all of that psychologically with me into my marriage and into my marriage bed.
Want me.
Yeah.
Find me enough.
Yes.
Find me more than enough.
Yes. You don't want me? What do you mean you don't want me?
What's wrong with me?
What's wrong with me?
I knew there was something wrong with me.
You're pouring salt on all my wounds.
Why would you do that?
You're tired tonight? What? What's wrong? What? You don't want to what? What?
Yeah. Yeah.
And just as you said, all this stuff gets stirred up. And we shouldn't look at that as, I just kind of groaned we should look at that as, this is an opportunity for me to realize where I'm in need of growth and to allow genuine love into these places. All the tensions, all the frictions, all the struggles in the marriage bed are like a mirror to look in to say, okay, where do I need to grow? Where do I need to heal?
And that is terrifying because we're not sure that healing is possible for us.
Yeah.
We believe healing is possible for other people.
Yeah.
Like you just mentioned your story about feeling insecure. And as an outsider who's not in your head and in your heart, I'm like, oh, you're such a good man. And I got all the reasons in the world that you shouldn't feel that way. And you'd say the same about me. But if we do tend to believe the lie that healing isn't possible for us.
Yeah.
And in one way or another, maybe we don't even know how to articulate that, but it lies at the bottom of our subconscious so that when we're invited to healing, it doesn't seem like that. It just feels like black loneliness forever.
Yeah.
That's what we're being invited into, which is why therapy is so crucial, which is why the work of Bob Schutz and the good work he's doing is so crucial because it helps us look at that and go in there with Jesus.
Yeah, I would strongly encourage people. We've done a retreat on our patron community with Bob Schutz.
Good.
And we've done a retreat with another organization, Desert Stream Ministries, Andrew Comiskey and his team. We have to take this theology and apply it to these places where we need healing. And people like Bob Schutz, people like Andrew Comiskey are doing that work of helping people take this theology, but then apply it to these really deep, painful.
Sister Miriam James, who I love, used the analogy of sometimes you come in from the cold, maybe you've been playing in the snow, and you put your hands by the fire because your hands are frigid and it hurts like hell. And the temptation is, I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
You don't want to be
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Sister Miriam's great.
Love that one.
All right, let's move along. Can you take us to quote number 2 here?
If the woman does not find happiness and satisfaction in sexual intercourse, it becomes particularly easy for her to fall into sexual frigidity. That is, the inability to experience sexual arousal, especially in the climactic phase. This frigidity is sometimes the result of an inhibition on her part, or of a lack of involvement which may even at times be her own fault. But it is usually the result of egoism in the man who, failing to recognize the woman's subjective longings and the objective laws of the sexual process taking place in her, seeks only his own satisfaction, sometimes quite brutally.
Let's pause there for a minute. I'm glad he acknowledges here that, we can't just conclude it's always the guy's fault here, right? The woman comes to the marriage bed with her own issues, fears, hang-ups, sometimes real sinfulness, sometimes even a disdain for the masculine, which can wreak and does wreak havoc on the marriage bed. But also, we have to acknowledge, because of this physiological distinction between the male and the female, it is possible and sometimes probable that the man is not sensitive about the inner world of a woman. later, as we go through this, John Paul II will talk about the need of the man and the woman to educate one another about their own inner worlds, right? Oh my gosh, you and I have both been married a good long time, and you will always be, thanks be to God, learning the inner world of our wives. It's just so other than our own inner world. And the adventure of marriage, an integral part of the adventure of marriage, is discovering the joy of the complementarity of that other world.
Well, the other thing that I've been finding in my marriage is living with a healed woman, or if you're healing, learning to live with a healed man, you have to change the way you've been relating. So I grew up, I think, in some ways very in an unmasculine way. I had male friends, but I learned not to confide in them. So I would confide in women, and I learned through different things to bring my burden to the woman. Yeah. Now my wife grew up in an environment where she felt the responsibility to make everyone okay. So I'm bringing my garbage of somehow settle me or pacify me, make things well, which is very unmasculine. And I've got my wife trying to make everything okay, which in an untwisted sense might be more of a masculine behavior. And we're coming together, you see? And so we didn't realize the wounding that was being done to each other in that until we both started to find healing. And now I'm learning as a man to carry my load well, to bear my responsibility without having to bring her into every part of that, to give of my strength. She's also learning that she can be safe to not have to make everyone okay. You see?
Oh, that's freedom for a woman.
Yeah, and that's starting to happen in my marriage 17 years into our marriage. My point is just that as we grow in Christ, we're kind of like, we are the same person, but the healed person. Now we're learning to interact with each other in a new way.
Yes, there are new aspects of the dance the more you grow and integrate and heal from those.
It's so great.
Broken,
I have to say, our relationship as friends over the last 2 or 3 years, it's been hard. There's been moments where we thought this is maybe too hard.
Yeah.
But as we find new vistas, new summits that then lead to others, we're like, okay, this is wow. Okay, this is good. This is hard, but this is good, right? Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, marriage is hard. Anybody who tells me marriage isn't hard, I don't believe them. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what.
Either the two of you are saints, which I'm open to.
No.
No, don't be open
Even
to
if
that.
you're saints, it's hard. Even if you're saints, it's hard. Marriage is hard. Even if you're, good night.
Well, what you said earlier about your brother, this is what's so sad about child abuse, is that the child has not yet lived long enough to learn defense mechanisms. So he's just vulnerable to the attacks of others. But then you spend your whole life learning how to defend yourself, which is the appropriate thing to be, by the way, defensive. If someone's attacking you, you ought to be. And then you go into marriage with all of these things, and then you got to learn how to live together. Don't be defensive. I thought you were attacking me. I wasn't, but I kind of was. And exactly.
And not only do we have those wounds that inform the way we interact with each other, we have our fallen humanity that is complementary in a wounding way, right? The differences of man and woman before sin entered the world were brought about harmony and unity. The differences so often in our fallen humanity are a source of friction, and they're complementary in a way that we're pouring salt on each other's wounds.
That's why my wife and I say we love to hang out with couples our own age, because when we hang out with people who've been married 2 years, they don't understand why you would intentionally hurt your wife. You don't understand that? Oh, I've done that, and then went, I hate myself for it, but I've done it.
My wife just recently apologized to me for something a long time ago that she was intentionally wounding me.
Bless her. What a beautiful, vulnerable thing for her to do.
Yeah, and it took her a long time just to recognize it.
Because it's always easier to double down and be like, no, this is you. Man.
Yeah, and it brought about such a healing when we are willing. It was compared to the offenses I've caused my wife. This little thing she was apologizing for was like a little thing here, and mine's like huge huge stack of sins on my side, little sins over here. She apologizes for this. And in doing so, it's shown this light on my own sins. And we ended up just crying in each other's arms, forgiving each other, and accepting God's mercy in a whole new level of our lives as husband and wife.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm so happy to hear that. I wanted to just say, not to nod on at that
No,
by
no.
jumping around, but I wanted to say too that in saying leading each other to climax, that kind of thing, I also think it's an act. I know in the past it's been an act of love for my wife to be like, all right, sure, okay, we can make love, but like we have like 5 minutes. Let's go. Let's get this done. That's also a beautiful act of love.
Can be.
Yeah.
We had a video posted on our channel. When was this one? It had all those. 2 years ago. I don't think it was that long ago. It was maybe a year ago. Anyway, it doesn't matter when it was, but it was a woman who was saying there are times when circumstances are not ideal, and out of love for my husband, I want to offer him the delight of our union. And I'm not expressing it as well as she did, but she was saying there are times it's not going to be this wonderful 2-hour experience.
Let's get her done.
And I want to offer you myself. Here I am. And the comments we got, oh my gosh, like, this is a terrible husband that he would ever do such that he would demand of. She wasn't saying he was demanding this. She was saying, I want to be this gift to you. And even, there's just, it's like almost a Rorschach test where you're like, how do you see this? What are you seeing here? And yes, there are abuses that can take place here, but there are times where it's not going to be the ideal thing, but we learn how to enter into what John Paul II calls right here, the culture of marital relations. Can we look at number 3?
In order to create genuine harmony in conjugal intercourse, we need appropriate and constant sexual education, not merely instruction concerning the technical matters of sex, but precisely integral education in love. The most important point is to realize that the other person is more important than I. This conviction will not appear on the basis of bodily intercourse alone. Sexual intercourse alone does not teach love, but love, if it is a virtue, will also turn out to be such in sexual intercourse. This is where a proper culture of marital relations is needed. Whereas sexology pays principal attention to technique in sexual relations, couples need much more to foster a true culture of marital relations. In this way, the sexual urge can be transformed in the interior of the person into the real ingredients of love.
Yeah. So there you have this need. In the modern world, we reduce good sex. Was it good for you?
Yeah.
We reduce that to technique.
We do the same thing with prayer, incidentally.
Yes.
Anyway.
That's another series we should do. Wow, you're exactly right.
Yeah.
We do that to prayer. And the analogy is profound. If I may say so, Pope Benedict XVI says, when the Christian prays, he is seeking nuptial union with the Lord.
Quote? Is that a quote?
Yep.
Beautiful.
And if we turn that into a technique, we're in trouble. Same in the marriage bed. If we turn it into a technique, how many manuals can you get, sex manuals that will tell you X number of positions and techniques? John Paul II says what we really need is a culture of marital relations, which is this place of tenderness, this sharing of our inner worlds, so that I can get to know the inner world and sensitivities of my wife. She can get to know the inner world of my life and my sensitivities. And I remember probably 15 years into marriage. 15 years into marriage. We're 28 years now. 15 years into marriage, my wife had this epiphany where something that had been a source of great pain for me in our marital intimacies, I remember the very moment where her eyes were like, they got open to seeing something that I had been trying unsuccessfully because of my brokenness and hers to communicate to her. And I remember the moment she saw it, and she said, I just tears started rolling down her cheeks. And she said, I think I'm beginning to see what you were trying to tell me. and it's too personal to get into all the details of that, but it was a moment of my world that I had been trying to share. She entered in, and I felt her entering in, and I felt so blessed and seen and known and affirmed. And her willingness, it took whatever hang-up she had and whatever issues I had, it took all those long years of creating a culture in our relationship where she could finally enter into this place. And the point there is, this is a long-term reality. It takes a lifetime to enter into these depths. You can't expect this on the wedding night. Recall that in a previous episode, we were talking about how John Paul II says that when you marry, you don't have to be fully mature, but you have to be mature enough to continue maturing, right? That applies very particularly in the marriage bed. If you were chaste, you will not have had sexual experiences when you get married. You're starting together at the same place, and you're entering a pilgrimage of learning. For me, I had sexual experiences before I got married. My wife did not. I have had to overcome sexual wounds from illicit sexual experiences to kind of catch up to a ground zero with my wife where we could go on that journey together. And of course, her love has helped me to heal from those old wounds. It's not like she's here and I'm just running to catch up, but her love is meeting me in my sexual wounds to bring about a healing that enables us to have this culture of marital relations. How do you find, or in your ministry experience or personal experience, the difference between a technique of sexual relations versus a culture of sexual relations? Does that language land for you, Matt?
Yeah, well, for me, it kind of gets back to what Karol Wojtyła says earlier about the importance of a woman trusting her husband so that she might open herself up to him. And I know Jason Everett has referenced different studies that show that a woman is much more likely to climax in a marital or loving relationship and to experience sexual satisfaction. And you go, okay, why? And it's not because of the technique. It's because the woman and the man feel safe enough to actually give each other. Because, I mean, orgasm is a sort of sweet, sweet death.
Yes.
Where one has to let go.
Well, you know the French expression.
No.
The very word for orgasm in French is little death.
Okay. Yeah. To allow oneself to die in that way. I mean, it's such a vulnerable moment. And I'm sure for the woman more so in a way, because I think in a way a man has less control. Yeah. Right? Because it's necessary for the sexual act that he climax. Right. It's not necessary for the sexual act that she climax. Right. And so for the woman to allow herself that, it seems to me that makes the most sense within a trust that I'll go where you're leading me here. Yes. And that has less to do with technique than trust.
Yes. And JP2's word for that whole reality is tenderness. Tenderness. Look at number 4.
Tenderness toward the other person can soothe and equalize those vehement reactions of sensuality that are oriented merely towards satisfying sensual impulses, which always happen at the other person's expense. A disinterested tenderness enables one to enter readily into the other person's emotional states and lived experiences, and this can play a big part in harmonizing conjugal intercourse. What does that mean?
Yeah. So disinterested tenderness. Disinterested is an interesting word. It does not mean you're not interested in the other person, obviously, but it means you're not interested in a selfish way. Right? A disinterested tenderness is a readiness to even sacrifice my own particular preference or desires to enter into the emotional state of the other. You were explaining this earlier. Cameron showed you that disinterested tenderness when it's not ideal for a woman to engage in the marital act in a short time frame typically, but she's showing you a disinterested tenderness in willing to sacrifice what might be a preference of hers to bless you and to enter into your
not to.
world.
It's always difficult talking about these things, isn't
Yeah,
it? Because
tender-
you're
yeah,
always
it's
trying to find where the
delicacy.
line
There's
is
a- yeah.
between sharing too much and sharing too little. But certainly in our marriage, there's been times where I've become aware that my wife was in pain. And to me, I couldn't think of anything more gross
Yes.
than inflicting pain upon
Yes.
my wife.
Yes.
So
Amen.
having to stop.
Amen.
Now I don't want to actually kind of celebrate myself there, because I think at the best what that is a love for her, such that I wouldn't ever want to cause her pain. But it could also be that I want to be a cause of delight. So it still could be a hedonistic thing. I always am very skeptical of my intention. Oh, have we shared this? I don't know.
No,
Privately,
Matt,
but
I want to affirm you here. I
Yeah.
want to affirm this as a good example, a very proper example of this disinterested tenderness. And conversely, the man who wouldn't have such disinterested tenderness when he realizes his wife is in pain, but just wants what he wants, that's a good example of what JP2 is calling that brutality.
yeah.
The
But
brutality of the
so I
man.
suppose that if that was disinterestedness, where it's like, oh no, we're definitely stopping right now, and I'll deal with it. It's fine. That if that was true disinterestedness, that was probably a tenderness towards my wife
Yes.
that enabled her to open to me. And
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. And
which
now
knew-
your
yeah.
wife in that situation knows by her lived experience, my husband's not just in this for me. Excuse me, for him, for himself.
Yeah.
My husband's not just in this for himself. He has this tenderness toward me. And imagine over the course of a lifetime of a woman experiencing that tenderness. Like a flower, she's going to open and trust and surrender. But conversely, imagine over a lifetime the brutality of a man who doesn't care if his wife's in pain and just wants what he wants and gets it. What's going to happen to that flower?
Yeah, shrivel up.
Shrivel up. And I think we live in a world of shriveled up flowers.
Hearts. Yeah, shriveled up hearts that become
Shriveled up hearts.
resentful and then hateful. I often go back to Nietzsche's concept of ressentiment. He uses this French word for resentment, which means, in his understanding, that you demonize what you believe yourself impotent to attain.
Oh.
So now he attributes this to Christ and to Christians. Christians are so weak. They can't go and suck the marrow out of life. And so they make a virtue out of meekness.
Right.
He would say the same of Christ, but it's actually really interesting because, I'll use one example and then another example. And of course, there can be exceptions to both.
Yeah.
But you're on Instagram. You see somebody posting a workout video, and you hate them for it.
Yeah. Yep.
Now, do you hate them for it because they're actually prideful and egotistical? Well, they might be. But the reason you might hate them is because you're a slob.
Yeah.
And you wish you were
There's
like that,
envy.
but can't. So you hate them.
Yeah.
You demonize what you feel yourself
Yeah.
impotent to attain. Now, in the sexual realm, I see a lot of hatred towards Christians, a lot of mockery towards Christian virtue, because I actually would like a beautiful marriage where my wife respects me and my children love me, but I don't think that's possible for me.
Yeah.
So screw those
you,
guys, those prudes, those uptight frigids.
Yep. That's insightful. And in that same context of the shriveled up flower that then demonizes, you begin to understand in that shriveled up place, the only protection for that woman is, all right, I'll play the game, but not without contraception and abortion. Fine, if you can't beat them, join them. There's no call to virtue. It's just a succumbing to the most cynical approach to human sexuality that one can imagine. And we call this normal. In our world today, we think, to use an example from a previous episode, we think banging on the piano is music. There's so much more can be had. We are made for so much more. And again, that call, that basic disposition of John Paul II, pay attention to what you really desire at the deepest level, below the cynicism, below the suspicion, below the blame, below the whatever kind of hatred you're projecting out at other people. Go down to the deepest level of your desires, and you will discover there the desire to be seen, known, and loved as indispensable, irreplaceable, and unrepeatable. Because this is what we are. everything the church is holding out to us, everything the church teaches about sexual morality is meant to safeguard precisely that. You are indispensable. That's why it hurts when people throw you away. You are irreplaceable. That's why it hurts when people throw you away and replace you with somebody else. And you are unrepeatable. That's why it hurts when you get compared to somebody else. There's no other you. You are incomparable. If your spouse is comparing you to some former lover or some person in pornography, that is a wound. Don't rationalize it. Don't say that's just the way it is. That's just the world we live. Pay attention to the desire, and it will give shape to what we're made for, and we will come to discover that what the church is teaching is actually what we're made for. We'll still see the gap between what we're made for and where we are, but grace can make up for this gap.
And just a word of hope for husbands who have been bad to their wives. You know, think of back to the analogy of the flower in the morning that opens itself to the sun. So if you have been brutal to your wife, to one degree or another, you can still be tender towards her and love her now. And someone won't open themselves to a tyrant, but they will open themselves to a good lover.
And repentance is a beautiful way to have a closed flower begin to open up. It's a long journey. It's not if you've had years and years of brutality in a marriage, and a husband says, "I'm sorry," don't expect everything to be healed that night.
Yeah.
But if you're willing to go on that pilgrimage of acknowledge, and I have, my goodness, I think one of my biggest problems in my own marriage was that I had all this head knowledge going into it of what theology of the body is, and I was already a student of John Paul II when I got married. I was already teaching and writing on it. I had all this head knowledge, and I thought that because I could articulate it, I thought that meant I was living it.
Yeah.
And my wife, you may know the story, I tell it often, of the book that I was invited to write for husbands. Loving Her Rightly. And my wife said when I told her the title of the book, "You are in no place to be writing a book for husbands called Loving Her Rightly." That was 10 years into marriage, and it was the beginning of a real examination of my conscience in ways that I unknowingly, my broken humanity was just hurting my wife. And it's been a long pilgrimage of looking at that honestly and bringing it out into the light and letting God's mercy in there. And if she had come at me without mercy herself, this is key to any married couple who wants to grow and heal in these areas. My dear sisters out there, if you have a husband who has not been treating you well and you feel called to confront him, my wife for years had been bringing her pain to the Lord in her own prayer. And she got to a place of compassion for her broken husband. If she had come at me with her fists up and wanting to punch me back, well, I would have put my fists up and I would have shown her who had bigger fists. She came at me with mercy, with tenderness. And that enabled me in my hardened places to begin to open up.
Yeah, speak in a way as to be understood, if you wish to be.
Yes.
We should point out, too, that like you and I are fellas. We're speaking from the male perspective. Yes. If women are obviously fallen daughters of Eve with their own wounds, we would encourage women to create a series like this for women.
Amen.
But one of the reasons we're calling men on is, one, they are the primary initiators of love.
And
two,
we are
we're
men.
Speaking from our own experience.
Right.
Yeah.
Shall we go to number 5?
If spouses are to find harmonization in intercourse, they must educate each other. The man must reckon with the fact that the woman is a world different from himself, both physiologically and psychologically. If he is to play an active role in intercourse, he must get to know this other world. And indeed, as far as possible, he must project himself into her world emotionally. That's very good.
Yeah.
This is precisely the positive function of tenderness. Without it, the man will attempt merely to subject the woman to the demands of his own body and his own psyche, frequently harming her in the process. Of course, the woman, too, must try to understand the man and simultaneously educate him to understand her, for one is not less important than the other. Neglect with respect to either one of them can be equally a fruit of egoism.
I remember this realization some years ago. I can't keep track of when all these things happen in the course of married life, but I was finding my wife's other world so frustrating, and finding it so frustrating that she found my other world so frustrating. And there was just this kind of stalemate of frustration. And I remember thinking, why can't you just think like me? And then the realization came, well, that would make her a man.
Do you really want that?
Do I really want? No, I'm serious. That's exactly where
Okay.
in my own thinking,
Yeah.
you know what? I began thinking, I think this might be an insight into some of the dynamic of homosexuality.
Yeah, that worries me.
That the otherness is so frustrating that I just want somebody who gets me and can give me what I want, because you want the same damn thing. And in that situation, the brutality of the male, or the tendency towards that brutality, is just unleashed, because you have two who don't have anything to correct the other with otherness, because it's sameness. And it's just the explosion of the worst of the male libido.
Yeah.
Or it can be. And I came in that moment as my mind was, oh, I see what, oh, is that what, oh. I was like, oh my gosh, my wife's differences are a treasure to me.
Yeah.
Because they check me. They jostle my masculinity toward, if I let her femininity do this, her femininity will jostle my broken masculinity towards a more integrated masculinity, and the other direction too. Like that story I told of Wendy coming to enter my world and repenting and crying that she hadn't seen it before. And I'm glad, JP2 clearly says it can be egoism on either side here.
Yeah.
That culture of marital relations, that tenderness where we take the effort, and it is an effort, and it is difficult, to learn the world and to honor the world and to enter the world of the other with tenderness.
Indeed. Should we move on to number 6?
Let's do it.
The fear of a child can wreak havoc on a woman's psyche and even disturb her natural biological rhythm. This fear is the main source of female neurosis in relation to sexual intercourse. The correct way out of this situation can only be found in a marriage that is physically harmonized. As we have demonstrated, this is achieved not merely as a function of physical technique, but through the maturing of a genuine culture of intercourse based on self-mastery, love, and tenderness. Such a marriage is the fruit not only of sexual compatibility, but of an ethically fully mature choice.
I want to zoom in on that phrase, self-mastery.
Yeah.
That a genuine culture of intercourse must be based on self-mastery, love, and tenderness. I will often ask my audiences, I'll say, guys, pay attention. I'm going to ask the women a question. And I'll say, ladies, how many of you want to be married to a man who cannot say no to his sexual desires? I have asked hundreds of thousands of women that question over the last 30 years.
Let's see where this is going.
Never has a hand gone up. Never has a hand gone up. And I say, ladies, maybe you've never put this in words, but tell me if this is getting at these words. Tell me if this gets at what you know to be true. And I say, women intuit right away that if a man cannot say no to his sexual desires, his yes means nothing. And if his yes means nothing, what does that make you? And inevitably the women say, an object. There it is. There it is. We know that if you can't say no, your yes means nothing. And if your yes means nothing, the other person is just an outlet for my own sexual gratification. We are treating then this person as something rather than as someone, and we're violating the personalistic norm. In this whole section of the book Love and Responsibility, Sexology and Ethics, he's saying, look, we can learn things from sexology that demonstrate the truth of the personalistic norm. We can learn from sexology that women experience sexual frigidity when their husbands are brutal, right? This is information gained from sexology. Mm-hmm. And what we discover here is that these women are not being loved as persons, they're being used as things. And the path towards authentic, harmonious marital relations where both can experience the fullness of the joy of the marital embrace, not just as a sensation that is utilitarian, but as the joy of loving divinely, the path to that divine joy is precisely the path of growing in self-mastery, so that my desires are not in control of me, I'm in control of them, and I can guide them and steer them towards authentic self-giving. That's self-mastery, love, tenderness, the culture of marital relations that creates an environment that allows the surrender required for both to experience the joy that God wants for us in the marriage bed. Mm.
Yeah, if I have self-mastery, then it's like either I have to master myself or I have to master everything around me.
Exactly.
I have to manipulate you, the situation, what's going on, which actually ends up being a lot more exhausting. And I thought about this recently, like coming to your house, spending time with your family. I thought, I've begun to realize now when I have a experience, like we'll go out for a drink or we'll go do this or we'll go to this park, I have to let go of my expectations. Because what ends up happening is I find myself feeling anxious that things will go the way that I want them to go, or I'll seek to manipulate them and I'll be frustrated, you know?
Yes.
Whereas if I can just sort of enter into it with a sort of freedom, then I don't get frustrated. If I can master myself, I don't have to master you.
That's a disinterested tenderness.
And if you don't feel mastered by me, you're a lot more likely to give yourself to me, you know, in friendship. Yeah.
Another way to say the very same thing is, if I'm not in control of my own sexual desires, I will seek to control others to gratify them.
Yeah.
If I am in control of my sexual desires, I can learn how to direct them towards honoring the dignity of the other. Yeah. That's the cultural marital relations we're after. And in closing, this final quote here from John Paul II, or paraphrase.
Go for it.
He's talking about how trial marriages where people live together before they get married to see if we're sexually compatible.
Yeah.
You are starting on exactly the wrong footing.
I did a video on this a while back that's got hundreds of thousands of views, and it was just me reading Jordan Peterson saying this, and I thought it must be frustrating for Christopher West and Jason Everett. Like, they've been saying this for years, and then Jordan Peterson picks up on the realization that we shouldn't treat our wives like cars to be used, test-driven.
Go ahead and read this one, number 7.
It is clear that the sensual affective factors of attraction are at work in a very powerful way in the choice of a spouse. However, a rational analysis of the moral maturity of the person should nonetheless be of decisive importance. Here, the much recommended trial periods of sexual intercourse before marriage to test compatibility offer no real guidance in choosing a spouse. Marital compatibility cannot be tested in advance by premarital intercourse because the specificity of marital intercourse is different from that of premarital intercourse. Non-marital intercourse is something altogether other than genuinely marital intercourse. The goal in choosing a spouse is not so much sexual compatibility as it is the mature choice of the person.
I'll tell you a story that brings this together. I was the director of the Marriage and Family Life Office in the Archdiocese of Denver back in the day.
Yeah.
This is the late 90s, early 2000s. And this couple called me up. They said, can we come see you? They weren't even Catholic, but they had heard a talk I gave, and they wanted to come meet me in my office. They had been married for maybe 4 years, and they had saved sex for marriage. And he bitterly regretted doing so. They had both been sexually active prior to marriage with other people. They had come to Christian faith. They decided we're going to save sex for marriage with each other. but they had been sexually active with various other people.
He resented her telling him we need to wait?
No, they both mutually agreed to wait. But now 4 years into marriage, he was bitterly resentful that they had waited. And here's what he said with her sitting right next to him in my office. If I had known that you would not be as good at sex as so-and-so and so-and-so, I never would have married you.
Holy mackerel.
And her lip is just going...
Did you want to punch him?
Quivering and tears going down her cheek.
What a prick.
But this...
Sorry.
No, I mean,
people are trying to express themselves. But
you're
my
right.
Goodness,
you're right.
He could have done it a little better than that.
The brutalness on the feminine heart of what he was saying, and the utter ignorance of,
and that's a sure way to see to it that your wife will never be.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. How you tell a woman that you're not beautiful or you're not good at sex? Great way to have her close up and see to it that actually does never happen.
Or even worse, you're not as good as so-and-so was. Because what are you doing? You are comparing this person to this person. Yeah. And the person is unrepeatable, incomparable. You can't, to compare another person to another, to compare one person to another person is in itself an injustice to the unrepeatability of the person. What this demonstrated to me very clearly is sex to him was utilitarian. She was supposed to be the ideal outlet for his selfish indulgence. She didn't prove to be. She wasn't as good as so-and-so. Therefore, I resent you. I resent that you made me, they agreed to it mutually, but I resent that we agreed not to have sex. Why? Because he wanted to try her out. This is the problem with a trial period. You can't try someone. You can't experiment with someone. The very nature of it is I'm sizing you up. I'm seeing if it reduces, put it this way, it reduces the whole experience to technique rather than to the honoring of the other as a person. The whole point of love and responsibility is to introduce love into sexual experience. Genuine love, not just warm feelings, but genuine love. And what is genuine love? You told us in a previous episode. To will the good of the other for their sake. To will the good of the other for the other's sake, even if it costs me. What was that husband called to? Rather than blaming her for not having good technique in bed, that husband was called to understand the inner world of his wife and to honor it with a disinterested tenderness at which he utterly failed. Yeah. The problem with trial intercourse or trial marriage or living together before you're married is that the very nature of sexual intercourse is to say to the other, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. There's no other you. I've known it so evidently and so clearly that, and I've said this in a previous episode, that the only way I can be as naked with my wife as I am called to be in the marital act is if she has promised me and God and everyone on the planet that she will never leave me or forsake me. It's the only way I can be as naked as the sexual act calls me to be.
Yeah. And it's also like the opposite of the greatest love ever shown on earth is our Lord, hey, who says, this is my body given up for you. Well, what does that look like if you flip it? This is your body taken by me.
Yeah, I'm taking it for myself.
And that sounds like what this fellow was doing.
That's right.
He wasn't interested in being the initiator of the gift, to give of his strength for the good of his wife. He wanted to take something from her, which he then deemed her unable to give him.
Yeah, you can't practice the total gift of self. You have to do it or not do it. And that doing it or not doing it is called marriage. The marital act is the expression of I give myself to you totally, I will never leave you. You can't practice that.
Yeah.
Because the very nature of premarital intercourse is I'm going to see if I'm going to stay with you. I'm trying it out to see if I'm going to stay with you. I'm trying it out to see if I'm going to commit myself to you. you can't learn the total gift of self by making a half-assed gift of self.
Yeah, just like you can't kind of throw yourself out of an aeroplane.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah.
Marriage
Do
is
it or
that
don't do it.
total throwing yourself out of the airplane. And that's not something you can try.
And we'll maybe end on this. Maybe you have some thoughts. But as you're throwing yourself out of that aeroplane with your wife, don't look to the other man and woman who are falling next to you, because we're all so different. Someone once said to me, never compare your interior to another's exterior.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's because we're incomparable, which means
your marriage will always look different to my wife and I's
exactly
marriage.
what
And
I was
if I
gonna
try
say.
to make my marriage look like
Yep.
Christopher and Wendy's marriage,
Yep.
I'll do damage to both me and her.
that's right. That's right. The culture of marital relations for Matt and Cameron is going to be different than the culture of marital relations for Wendy and Christopher because we're unrepeatable
And
persons.
I'm sure you've taken that into account in your great work on this, because as you're talking to married couples, it's so important that you don't say, look, you need to look like this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, this is what we're called to. We know we're called to this. When we see it, we say, yes, I can acknowledge I want that. If we're honest, we recognize we're way over here. But here's the good news. There is a grace at work in us, if we open up to it, that can take us on this pilgrimage to become the men and women we're created to be. And I love this expression. We'll end with this from JP2. He uses this expression, become what you are. This is how Wendy and I end all of our podcasts. You are a gift, become what you are. It's an interesting expression because contained within it, become what you are. How can I become what I am? But within it is contained the very reality of there's an original reality that I'm not right now because I've fallen, but there's also an invitation and a grace that enables me to become what I am.
Yeah.
What I am. You are a gift. Become what you are. Thanks, Matt.